Well, hi everyone. We're back with our study of Hannah. I'm not home from Florida yet. I'm just visiting my daughter, but I thought I would take a minute and put down some of my thoughts about Hannah today. I was reading her story again, and as I was reading it, I couldn't help thinking, why does the Bible stop right in the middle of Hannah's story and start to talk about Hophni and Phinehas? It's very curious, but it is, in a way, part of the story. And I think, for me anyway, what it does is it highlights or compares the goodness of Samuel as a priest, a man of God, and the degradation, really, or the bad priests that Hophni and Phinehas were. And of course, what's interesting is both of them were raised or tutored, let's say, by Samuel. So it's very interesting. Um, I'm going to read starting 1 Samuel 2, but starting in verse 11, which is right in the middle. It says, Then, remember, Hannah did her beautiful prayer. Remember, we looked at that last time. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, but the boy ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. So the boy Samuel stayed there. Okay, and Hannah and her husband went back to Ramah. Now, right at the end of that part of the story, Hannah's going to come back in the picture in a minute, but right now they go on and talk about Eli's wicked sons. And verse 12 it says, I think this is the New Living Translation. It's the New International Version. Eli's sons were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord. If we look at the English Standard Version, it's interesting that one puts it even a little stronger. It says, Now the sons of Eli were worthless men, and they did not know the Lord. It is always amazing to me how somebody can work in the church and not know the Lord. But it happens. It happens. People use that position for other reasons. They don't really know the Lord. And if you are in a church like that, then you need to go somewhere else. Despite how many wonderful people there are in that church, you're not going to get good teaching there because the man of God that's leading it doesn't really know God. So we are told as Christians to be vigilant about people who are false teachers. And in this case, Hophni and Phinehas were ministering, even though Eli was still really their father, was still really priest. He was overseeing his sons who were in the same line. Again, they would have been in the line of Aaron, who was the original priest with Moses and all that. They would have been in that priestly line by birth. And so they began ministering in the temple, or in the tabernacle. But they never knew God. Now, how they could be sons of Eli and not know God, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't come by osmosis, though. You could be brought up in a Christian home and not necessarily understand the love of the Lord. And so this is what happened to Phinehas and Hophni. This is verse 13. The custom of the priests with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was still boiling with a 3-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and all that the fork brought up the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, Give meat for the priest to roast, but he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw. That's the English Standard Version, I think. Okay, now, in the New International Version, it says, he would plunge the fork into the pan or kettle or cauldron, and whatever the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. So here was the thing: when they had a sacrifice, they brought a meat sacrifice. Okay, one portion of it would go to God, and one portion of it would go to the priest, and one portion of it would go to the person's family, the person who was sacrificing. So God had ordained that the first part should go to him. He was teaching the people, just even in the way of their sacrifice, he wanted them to demonstrate that he was in control, that he was number one in people's lives. And so what he said is, put the sacrifice in and let the fat burn off, because the fat at that time was considered to be like the most important part of the meat, the choicest part, let's say. So the first fruits, the choicest part of this sacrifice, was to go to God. And then after that was done, they were allowed to take some of the meat out, and this would go to the priest. Now, priests did not have the same apportionment given to them that other tribes did, and this was a way that God said the people need to take care of the priests, need to basically pay them, give them food to eat from some of the sacrifice they were allowed to take. And then what was left was allowed to go to the person's family. And we remember that Elkanah gave portions of his sacrifice to Peninnah and her children, and then he gave Hannah a choice portion, right? So what this verse is telling us is that Hophni and Phinehas, when it came to this sacrificial duty that was there, that was prescribed by God, that they were greedy. And they didn't want to wait until the fat was burned off. They wanted the first part of the meat. They did not care about giving this sacrifice to God. So that's why it says that even before the fat was burned, the priest's servant, Hophni and Phinehas' servant, would come and say to the person who was sacrificing, give that priest some of the meat to roast. He won't accept boiled meat for a meal, but only raw. He's saying, don't put all that great fatty meat in there. Don't put it in there. The priest is going to get his portion before God does. So obviously they were saying the priest doesn't care about God, just cares about himself. And if the person, this is verse 16, if the person said to him, let the fat be burned first and then take whatever you want, the servant would answer, no, hand it over now, and if you don't, I'll take it by force. So not only were Hophni and Phinehas greedy and they wanted the best part for themselves, they were also violent. They were violent in that they would threaten the people who didn't want to do the sacrifice in the wrong way. Now think about that in terms of, I was thinking about it, I should say, in terms of how that affects people of faith. When you come to church, or in this case, when they came to the tabernacle, they were people of faith. They wanted to do things right. They cared about God. And to be faced with someone right there in the church, in the tabernacle in this case, who didn't care about God, I can't imagine how much that must have hurt their faith. I know it hurts in modern days. It hurts our faith when we hear of someone who works in the church who suddenly we realize that they were involved in embezzlement, or they used church funds for what they shouldn't have been, or they were involved in a sexual scandal or abuse of some kind. It hurts everybody's faith. It undermines us, with our walk with the Lord. And that's why really teachers and preachers are called to a higher standard, really, because what they do in their jobs affects other people's faith. If I make a mistake and, maybe my family might be affected or something, but it's not like I'm going to take down a whole church, So I think when someone is working in the church, we expect them to have a little higher calling in a way. And Hophni and Phinehas, quite the contrary, were devious and greedy and violent men. And they really didn't care about God. In fact, they didn't even know the Lord. Okay, they did not know the Lord. And that was not something that God would have been happy with for sure. Okay, so we'll keep going over. This is verse 17. This sin of the young men was very great in the Lord's sight, for they were treating the Lord's offering with contempt. Okay, in other words, this was a big, huge offense to God, because here it was what he had instructed his people to do out of faith. And then you say, no, I'm more important than you, God. I want my meat first. So this would not have been a happy situation for anybody. And look at how this is contrasted now with Samuel. The next verse talks about Samuel, 17 or 18. But Samuel, okay, notice the but. That's the comparison, isn't it? Okay, here's what Eli's real, legitimate, biological sons are doing in the tabernacle. Wrecking it for everybody else, being greedy, being violent, threatening people who are coming in to do a sacrifice. That's what they're doing. But Samuel was ministering before the Lord. So Samuel is contrasted with Hophni and Phinehas. He was a boy wearing a linen ephod. Okay, now a linen ephod, I looked it up. I have no idea why that was important, but it was a priestly garment. So what this says is, not only was he serving the Lord under Eli, but he was already wearing the priestly garb and starting to take on priestly duties and a priestly demeanor, you know. They show him being pure in his service, really, by this description, that he was so exceptional, really, that he received a linen ephod, this priestly garment to wear. He wasn't just a little kid, okay? He was growing up to be a man of God, and he was serving so beautifully and so purely out of such a heart for the Lord that he was given this little linen ephod to wear, which was a priestly garment. Now, what else did he wear? Okay, it says, each year his mother, remember that's Hannah, made him a little robe and took it to him when she went up with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice. So as Samuel is growing up, his mother's not forgetting him. She didn't just give him to Eli and say, serve in the tabernacle, I'm done now. No, every year she knew he had grown a little bit, so she brought him a new robe and gave it to him. So she definitely saw him every year when he went up for the sacrifice. And watch what happens when she goes up. Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife, saying, may the Lord give you children by this woman to take the place of the one she prayed for and gave to the Lord. And then they would go home. So Eli had not only given Hannah that first blessing, may the Lord answer your request, but every year when she came up, he blessed her again and blessed Elkanah and said, may the two of you have a lot of children. And this is verse 21. And the Lord was gracious to Hannah. She gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. And meanwhile, Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. So look how triply blessed, really, Hannah was. First of all, she has a loving husband. Second of all, God gave her Samuel. And not only was Samuel her son, but also when she dedicated him to the Lord, he grew up in the presence of the Lord, and he knew the Lord. And that was such a great gift that Hannah gave to him, really, by giving him up. And then thirdly, she was blessed with 3 more sons and 2 daughters. So she had like 6 children altogether, because you have Samuel, then you have 3 more sons, that's 4 sons, and then 2 more daughters. So she was blessed and blessed and blessed for her faithfulness. God was gracious to her. He was gracious to her. And Eli seems to be doing an okay job with Samuel, because he grew up in the presence of the Lord. But what about what Eli's doing with his own children? says, now Eli, who was very old, heard about everything his sons were doing to all of Israel and how they slept with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Eli knows what's going on with his sons. And not only, now we find out, not only are they greedy, not only are they violent, not only do they not know the Lord, but also they have sexual immorality. They're going to the women who are, they say, serving at the tent of meeting. I don't know what kind of service they were doing, whether it was a worship thing or whether they were actually women who were helping to take care of the tabernacle, serving in that regard. I don't know. It just says they were serving. And they went out and slept with them. So, really? You want to be a priest and then this is how you're acting? And Eli knew about it. Okay? He didn't, according to the Bible, really, he was old, but guess what? He knew. He knew what was going on, even though he was old. So, let's see what he does do. So, he said to them, okay, this is Eli talking to his sons. So he said to them, why do you do such things? I hear from all the people these wicked deeds of yours. No, my sons, the report I hear spreading about the Lord's people is not good. If one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender. But if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? His sons, however, did not listen to their father's rebuke, for it was the Lord's will to put them to death. Okay, so this was the rebuke that Eli gave them. To me, it's not very big. It's not really action. It's just words. Okay, what are you doing this for? Come on now. God doesn't like that, It was a very mild rebuke for such horrible actions against the Lord. And Eli knows that they are sinning against the Lord. He's not happy about that. He says, who's going to mediate for you? You're going against the Lord. And I think what the question is interesting too, because he says, if one person sins against another, God may mediate for the offender, but if anyone sins against the Lord, who will intercede for them? This is like a question that we could answer with the answer of Jesus, isn't it? Who's going to intercede for all of us when we sin against the Lord? Because everything we do wrong is really against the Lord. Let's face it. So, he doesn't do much really to stop Hophni and Phinehas. I'm thinking, as the head of the tabernacle, he probably could have taken them out of that position. He could have put Samuel in there. He could have done the job himself. He could have been more stern with them. But instead of that, he doesn't. So he kind of looks the other way, in a way, even though he knows what's going on, So the next sentence contrasts again Samuel with Hophni and Phinehas. This is verse 26. And the boy Samuel continued to grow in stature and in favor with the Lord and with the people. People know that Phinehas and Hophni are evil. They can see it in their actions. So now they're turning to Samuel and they're saying, he's growing up. He is a man of God. He is a definite man of God. And they like him. They look favorably on him. So eventually, God sends another prophet to talk to Eli and give him a very stern prophecy, really. And this is in verse 27. A man of God came to Eli and said to him, this is what the Lord said. Did I not clearly reveal myself to your ancestors' family when they were in Egypt under Pharaoh? And I chose your ancestor out of the tribes of Israel to be my priest. Okay, he's talking about Aaron here. He chose him when Moses brought the people out of Egypt. And I gave him to be my priest, to go up to the altar, to burn incense and wear an ephod in my presence. And I also gave your ancestors' family all the food offerings presented by the Israelites. Why do you scorn my sacrifice and offering that I prescribed for your dwelling, for my dwelling? Why do you honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choice parts of every offering made by my people Israel. Here's the thing, to me anyway now, and I could be wrong about this, but when I read this, I see Eli kind of looked the other way, but he did eat the meat. Okay, they're all fattening themselves on this meat that's coming from the sacrifice, and Eli knew that it wasn't coming the right way. It was coming before God got his part of it, and Eli knew that, but probably ate the meat anyway. Hey, this is pretty good. I don't usually have this meat with all this fat on it. You know, that's what it seems like to me. Now, I don't know. I could be wrong about that, but that's what it seems like. And so the God of Israel then declared a big prophecy against his family. And the Lord of Israel declared, I promised that members of your family would minister before me forever, but now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me I will honor. Those who despise me will be disdained. So we know then from this prophecy and the rest of this passage that God is going to raise up Samuel, and he's going to punish Eli and his sons. So I think that's why it's in there, to contrast Samuel with Hophni and Phinehas. But certainly Hannah was greatly blessed by her faithfulness to the Lord, by her praise and prayer that she gave, and her continuing love for Samuel as he grew up to be this great priest and great man of God. So that's kind of the end of the story of Hannah, but there's another story in 2 Samuel about another woman, and that's where I'm going to look next. 1 Samuel, excuse me. I didn't mean 2 Samuel is different. I'm talking about 1 Samuel. There's another story of another woman in 1 Samuel, and I'm going to look at her in the next session. So have a great day.